Okay, we're live.
Hi.
Hi.
Yay, we did it.
Good. Hello, everyone.
Hello from Floki as well.
Yeah, we got a cat appearance.
Yeah, who
That's
just woke up from a nap, so he'll be nice and hyper.
yeah. You guys can see and hear me and Sarah. Okay, please let us know in the chat. Say something about llamas, because that's our mascot here with Etchr, and then we'll get started.
Is there a
Um,
llama emote or emoji?
you know what? I don't know. Maybe I need to ask the Etchr
There
team
should be.
on that. Yeah. Okay, we got some nice kitty. Okay,
Hi,
yeah.
everyone.
Mama, good afternoon. Okay, perfect. That's working. Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Marian. I am your host for today's demonstration at Etchr. We have the wonderful Sarah Burns here with us today, as well as her cat making an appearance here. Awesome. My cat might make an appearance at some point, just FYI. Um, and throughout our 1 hour demonstration today, if you have any questions at all for Sarah, please all caps the word question, type your question in the chat so I can see them, and I will ask them to Sarah throughout her demonstration. We do these free online demos almost every day now. So subscribe to our channel, turn on your notifications to stay up to date and be alerted when we go live. Our next one is on Thursday, March 25th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with Ian Fennelly. He is a returning artist, so we're really excited to have him back to do some more wonderful painting with us. Again, subscribe if you haven't already and turn on your notifications so you know when that will start. And then we have our feedback forms, of course. If you are new with Etchr, we appreciate you taking a couple minutes to fill that out. This is just to let me and Sarah know how we're doing and what you would like to see in the future. If you have any suggestions for us, we really appreciate you discussing that in the feedback form that I posted there just now. And then of course, for today's workshop or live demo, what are words even today? We have a reference photo that Sarah will be using loosely throughout her demonstration. So it is in the description video or in the description area of the video. If you cannot find it for whatever reason, just let me know and I will drop the link into the chat box for you to pull out. Okay. And then I think that might be all I need to talk about today. So Sarah, I'm going to bring it on over to you. Why
Okay.
don't you know what we're doing here today?
Hi, guys. So first of all, hello to everyone. I can see some familiar faces in chat, and it's great to be here. If you don't know me, I'm Sarah. I currently live in Scotland, and I paint landscapes. So we are going to paint landscapes today. We are going to be doing a forest scene, and the idea behind today's theme is well, at least I'll show you how I convey or show mood in the scene based on color choice, as well as how I use very expressive marks. And I'll try to do my best to share my thoughts as I go, including how I know when to stop so that the painting still has that kind of fresh, expressive feeling in the end. Because sometimes that is the hardest part, is actually stopping. And this is a good example of that, where I could have taken it much further, but I really just wanted that really loose feeling. So I had to figure out when to stop. And I'll show you a couple examples of different forest scenes so you get an idea of my style. And sorry, the little audio thing popped up on there. So just as a quick run through of some of the marks that I like to make, I use big chunky, that's what I like to call it, chunky brush strokes. And very, well, maybe not very expressive color choices, but I like to play with color and experiment with color. And here's a couple examples. So you might see pops of magenta coming through, or bright neon green here and there, and that's just what I like to do. And so if you have the reference photo, you might recognize this scene that I'm showing you here. I did a couple warm-ups just to get warmed up, obviously, but also to show you that changing the colors in a scene can definitely give a different feeling, a different vibe. So this is the same scene as the reference photo, just painted with different colors. And today we're going to use different colors than this even. I'm going to go for a more, actually I have an example in here. I'm going to go for something more like this. So it'll be more of a horizontal scene, using the inspiration kind of loosely. And I'll be using different colors, obviously, than I used there to give it a little bit more, in my opinion, more of like a magical feel, kind of like an enchanted forest. And that's just like one of my favorite ways to paint. So yeah, let's get started.
So exciting. Oh my gosh, you're so good at light too. I was going to mention like capturing light in the painting.
Oh, thank you. That, I think honestly, that's like the thing I'm drawn to the most. The whole reason I paint a lot of scenes is because something about the light captured my attention and I just have to try to paint it. Yeah. And I do want to start by just quickly showing you one of my my little tips, I guess, for how you can start using expressive color. I have all these swatches, these mixing charts, I guess you'd call them, basically 2 color charts. So one color on one end, another color on the other end, and you mix a blend. So you get like a huge variety of what's possible with 2 colors. And when I start out a painting like this, if I know what feeling I want to create, that gives me a purpose. It's really good for like setting the intention of your painting. So today my intention is to paint something a little more magical and just very peaceful. So the colors I choose are going to be important. And so I wouldn't really necessarily choose something that's like maybe not so earthy, or definitely not spooky or anything like that. So I'll go with like brighter, slightly whimsical choices maybe. But how you use the color is important too, obviously. So this gets me started. And now I know, just by, I selected these already, now I know what colors I'm gonna put on my palette, and then that's what I have to work within. So it's a really great way if you just wanna explore different color combinations. And for today, we're gonna be using white, obviously. I always put fresh white on my palette. But I do sometimes paint out of my palette box, which means I'm not like squeezing paint onto the palette. It's just a matter of, or sorry if that was loud. It's just a matter of like how much time I have or how many colors I want to use, I guess. And we'll be using a little bit of ultramarine. I actually might even put a tiny bit of Prussian blue on the palette because I really like that color for making super dark darks, but you don't have to. I think it's better to start with a very limited palette, and then later if I decide to add like little touches of something else, I can add that after. I can add that to my palette later. And I don't know if you can see, I only do like little dollops. I don't need a lot because gouache is very vibrant. And it's also my style of working, my way of working is I typically start like watercolor. So I use it very thin down and then I build up to the thicker layers at the end. So I actually don't end up going through that much paint in a session.
Yeah.
And I also use gouache sometimes really thick, so it totally depends on my mood, but that's, I have other videos if you ever want to see like how I do really thick gouache.
Yeah.
And also I do apologize, I tend to ramble, and my people that are here from my channel know that. So if you have any questions, just interrupt me.
Yeah, sounds good. There are quite a few here already. I'll try and condense them for you before.
Okay. Yeah.
Was that permanent white or titanium white that you put in?
This is zinc white, which is my favorite mixing white. It's just like a tiny bit more transparent, I think. So it gives me like slightly cleaner mixes. But if you only have one white, it's really not going to make that big of a difference.
Yeah.
We'll typically use titanium white for the final highlights if I need it. Because it's like brilliant white.
I'll just put the colors in the chat so that people have them. So what red was the red that you put?
Permanent alizarin crimson.
The yellow?
And if I if you know I'm painting along and I miss explaining a step, just yell at me. And especially if I'm answering questions, then I might miss saying like what I'm doing.
Did you fashion a tiny stay wet palette for your gouache?
Oh, I did, kind of. And I actually just posted a video about this yesterday, but it shows like how I do this, but it's just a little stay wet sponge with a piece of palette paper and all my colors on top of that, which just helps the piles of gouache stay wet a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And then this is like my mixing area.
That's so awesome. Like MacGyvering it in. That's so cool.
I started out painting with acrylic way back in the day, and so I had that stuff from those days. And as I started painting with gouache and realizing how fast it dries out, because sometimes that's like the most annoying thing, I was like, wait, I could just use my stay wet palettes.
Yeah. All right. So we'll have her start real quick. I know there are a couple questions here about the color charts. So let's have Sarah start a little bit, and then she can talk about the color charts a little bit here.
Yeah. So a lot of times with my forest, I like to start with a very watered down wash of color, and it just kind of sets the tone for the background, especially. And in this case, I want it to be, I'm using maybe leaning more towards the cooler side of my colors in this painting. So I just have like a very white, it's white and blue, so just a very light blue color. And I will just do some really quick marks to lay that in. At this point, it honestly doesn't matter like how perfect your brush strokes are, because it's just going to be background stuff. And so I don't always start this way, but I like to, especially for forests. And I'll just add a tiny bit of the permanent alizarin crimson towards the bottom, because I'm going to have more like forest floor stuff going on over here, and that'll help. It'll contrast some of the green that I'm putting in later, so it'll just be a nice little play of color. I love working with the very diluted gouache, because I also started doing watercolor before I jumped into gouache, so it's like very comfortable to me.
Yeah.
And then I can just have that luxury of building up the opacity as I go.
Yeah.
Floki's attacking my sketchbook on the floor.
I have my cat right here next to me too.
And I am mostly using I've been playing with the Etchr watercolor brushes, but right now I'm using my giant 1-inch flat wash brush, which is what I typically do for the first couple minutes of the painting at least. And I don't really even have to wait for this to dry. I can jump straight into my next layer, because it's okay if it's nice and soft and faded. It's actually preferable. And so I'm gonna kind of focus the light on this side. So the light's gonna be in the background. It's gonna be a little brighter here. And as we come this way, it's gonna get a bit darker in the forest. So I'm thinking about the elements that are further away from me. In the reference, you can see far off in the distance, there's a bit of bright light peeking through. And then on one side, I'm going to make it a little bit darker. So it'll kind of help with that contrast. So this is where you kind of need to be brave. If you really want to go bold, I am going to mix some of my really dark colors. And this is why I have the Prussian blue on the palette, because it's so rich, so deep. It gives me like a super fast way to get really dark colors.
Sarah, do you always start with wetting the page?
Nope. Sometimes I just jump straight into laying in thicker color. And then even after I lay in a color, I'll sometimes spray it with water and soften it if I want. It kind of changes depending on what I'm doing. I know that's not the best answer. But if I am going for a very soft, I want it to have like a very, maybe even ethereal atmosphere to it, then I do like to use the watered down first layer. It's easy for me to think about it in terms of watercolor. Like I imagine it like watercolor when I start. So right now I'm thinking about how the background light area is my brighter part of the painting. And of course later I can come back in and add like highlights and stuff, but that is just a natural flow for me. So it might not be the same for other people. If you prefer to use gouache really thick, you would be laying in that color as like a thick white light blue, I mean, if you
Yeah.
know what I mean,
Yeah.
instead of letting the paper show through.
Right.
And as I'm painting in this darker area, which will be like the distant area of the forest. And as it fades to the left, I'm just changing from bigger brush strokes to little like tree branch style brush strokes.
And is this one of the Etchr sketchbooks that you're using?
Yeah, this is the hot press, which I love for gouache. The examples I showed you earlier were in my cold press etcher, which I still enjoy, but not as much for gouache. I prefer a smooth surface for gouache, but I love it for watercolor, the cold press. I love the texture. And even on hot press, I can get a lot of dry brush texture with gouache. So I don't have to have that cold press texture.
Interesting.
And yeah, so right now I'm just laying in like a variety of forms and shapes back here, because ultimately that's going to just sort of fade off into the background and not really be my focus. So my marks don't matter too much. And it's kind of a good thing that we only have, 45 minutes for the demo, because if you're working quicker, it kind of forces you to work a little bit more intuitively. And if you are going for that very expressive style with your brush strokes, I think you usually end up with a better result if you're working in that way. Mm-hmm. So this is forcing me to kind of like keep up the pace, I guess I would say. I'll also add a bit of yellow as the light falls through the forest. It'll like land on some of the grasses and pieces of the ground, as well as the tree branches. And in those areas, I'll add a bit more yellow to warm up that color. Otherwise, if I stayed with like a bluish green, it would all look a little bit too monochromatic for my taste. Mm-hmm. And the pathway is going to kind of come here, like meandering from the left to the right. So I sort of think about that as I paint these, and I'm painting around my pathway, but I will be adding some color there later. I like to just like block in my areas. It helps me think about the composition. Of course, you could do a sketch too, but I just jumped straight in, didn't I? Yeah. It is good to do sketches. Don't neglect your sketches. So here and there, I'll change from cool blue to cool green to warm green. And by that, I mean, I'll add more blue or more yellow, depending on what I'm going for. Yeah. And then soon I'll start introducing the other colors, like some of the red and like peachy tones. It's going to fade.
Yeah, sorry.
What's that?
Do you only use Winsor Newton gouache?
Yeah, right now I do, because I got a ton of it. And the more I use it, the more I like how liquidy it is. It works really well for my style, for my workflow. So I used to use Holbein because I also at that time just bought a ton of it. And so I had it. And besides that, I haven't tried any other brands. Mm-hmm. But the Holbein was a little bit thicker and I struggled a little bit with that. Yeah. But now I don't have that problem. Right. And I think it's good to try a bunch of different brands because everyone's style is so different and the way you work is so different. And you really don't know until you try it. Mm-hmm. So if something is a little bit more liquidy, it works good for the fact that I like to water down certain areas, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. And I can even use it straight out of the tube and it's still liquidy enough to like play nicely. Mm-hmm. And so here and there, I'm also going to add hints of like a peachish tone. So I'll take my white and red and maybe even a little yellow to get it on the orangey side and place in some of that on the pathway. Ooh. And sometimes the brush strokes, like you'll see a little more pink or a little more orange here and there. Maybe I didn't blend it enough, but I actually like that when it happens, if I'm going for this very expressive style.
Is that like dry brushing kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's just dusting across the surface of the paper, and sometimes the color doesn't mix completely on the palette, so I'll get like a streak of a color here and there, but that's what I mean. I like that. It kind of works for the style. Mm-hmm. And Also, I will switch to my smaller brush now. I've kind of done enough with the bigger brush, but I still like to use these flat brushes for gouache. I mostly use the flat brushes. When I do branches and little things, I'll switch to like a round brush sometimes.
And those are the Etchr brushes, right?
These ones are the watercolor ones. I was really hoping to try the gouache ones for the demo.
Yeah.
But I'll have to do that at some point in the future.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to start mixing up some grayish blue for some of the trees over that will kind of cover this darker area. And the thing with gouache is that it sometimes dries lighter or darker than what it looks like when it's wet. So I like to do little tests. So I'll put 1 or 2 tree branches down and then wait for it to dry and see if it was too light or too dark. And then I can adjust it. Because you just never know until it gets on the paper. Well, you know a little bit, but yeah. And I like to test it in a few areas. If my background is lighter, I'll add a little bit of a darker blue so that the blue stands out from the background. If the background is lighter, I'll add a bit more white so it's got that kind of ghostly look in front of the darkness. That was a mouthful.
I think we understood.
But I'm keeping the colors very cool in that area because I want all of that to sort of feel like it's in shadow. Right. And then over here, I'll have 1 or 2 tree trunks that get like a pop of highlight on them just to stand out a little bit from that darker, cooler background. And occasionally you'll see me switch to my bigger brush because I like using these the length of these bristles are perfect for like a spot of highlight on the tree branch, like a really long, think of them as like my pine tree branches are just one long thing. So this is perfect for laying in that long color. And then of course I can do that with a smaller brush. It just takes a little bit longer to lay in those. And I'm actually simplifying the whole tree branch to like 1 or 2 brush strokes. So it goes pretty fast.
Yeah.
And in the shadowy bits, I will add a bit of white, like I said, because I don't know what else to call it except ghostly, like the trees and the branches and the pine needles or whatever, they have that kind of ghostly shadowy effect when I add the white. And I just love how that looks. It kind of adds to that kind of magical atmosphere I'm trying to create.
So you did mention that you tend to deviate or make different variations of the reference photo that you're using for inspiration.
Yeah.
So could you maybe talk about how you came up or how you're using the reference photo now while you're working on this particular iteration of it?
Mostly, like obviously I changed the reference photo is vertical. I'm doing a horizontal piece.
Yeah.
And my colors are different, but I am looking at the light in the scene. So I actually turn my reference photos to black and white a lot of times just so I can use the light as my reference.
Right.
And the forms, I always change the forms and the composition for the most part. So it is about the light. Like we were saying earlier,
Yeah.
that is like the reason I like to paint things in the first place.
Right.
Capturing that sense of light in space. So turning it to black and white allows me to apply my own color choices to whatever I see. So if my darkest darks, I'll use a purple or a dark blue or something. And then my brights, I'll use a peach tone or a bright yellow tone. Like I can change it, based on what feeling I'm going for.
Mm-hmm.
And it just takes away the complication of the reference, because if you're looking at a colored reference photo, you want to paint what you see. Well, at least that's my tendency. Mm-hmm. So I can do it, but I just prefer to turn my reference photo to a black and white photo.
Yeah.
And
We got a great question here. Do you do thumbnails at all to plan out your scene?
yeah, a lot of times for bigger paintings, this, for instance, is just like a typical lighting or color study that I would do. So I don't always do it for this, but any kind of commission or bigger scene, I always do a thumbnail, like a few actually. So it's a value study with just pencil, and then sometimes even black and white paint. And I'll work out the lighting, I'll work out the composition ahead of time, because that's important. That's obviously, like I said, it's why I like to paint. Getting that lighting right is super important. Never underestimate the value of a sketch and a drawing and a value study.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now that I'm kind of done with the background part of that side, I will start adding some of the foreground trees, which aren't like right in our face, but they're in front of that area. So I'm going to add a bit more. I'm going to lean more towards the purple side of things. And yeah, just drop a few of those in. So I usually start with the trunk. And if it's a pine tree, they're relatively straight and not super twisty. I also do paint and draw a lot of twisty trees, which I love. And the branches, I tend to just make longer, and they kind of they bow down a little bit because the branches will be heavier. So shifting more to that purple color will help these stand out in front of that background. And it is pretty dark compared to that background. And it'll dry even darker than it looks when you first put it down. That's the thing. So you always have to think about that. And while that's drying, I'll just finish the left side.
Okay.
So sometimes I do this where I like work in chunks. So I'll work on one area, then another area, then another area. And then other times I'll just do top to bottom or like layer of the whole painting layer by layer. So my strategy shifts, I guess.
You're unpredictable. So.
Yeah, keep it on your toes. You thought you got me figured out? Nope.
Oh yeah, Ramona says she reminded me of Bob Ross when she put in that tree trunk.
You just got to go for it.
Yeah.
If I was going for maybe a more spooky scene, I would have preserved my brighter areas of the painting for very small sections.
Yeah.
And I probably would have used more muted colors as well.
Right.
Because it's not as inviting. Like that's the whole idea of using color to convey mood. Like if I'm using happy colors, I'm inviting you into my painting.
Yeah.
If I'm using earthy, dark colors and maybe lots of grays, it can still have a very peaceful feeling. Just depends how you use them, I guess. So yeah, I love that power we have.
Yeah.
We're like the inventors of our own worlds.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
I noticed you still keep your layers like pretty thin as you layer up. Like your texture or like the consistency of your paint is still rather thin. Is that?
Yeah, well, in this painting especially, it's not always like this, but I feel like this is a really great beginner approach as well. Like if someone is following along who just started with gouache, this is a nice intro to using gouache. And the thicker you go with gouache, the more complications you can have. But you can also have so much fun with blending the layers and blending your forms together. So like, don't be afraid of that either.
Right.
I said I was going to finish this side, didn't I? And I just automatically went back to the right side. I will use my round brush for a little bit of shadow on the pathway.
Yeah.
So I'll go with like a light purple.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like to do for shadows, I use dry brush. So I'll actually like dust the brush on the side instead of pointing it down at the paper. Mm-hmm. And it gives me like nice, it kind of lets me control how much comes off a little bit better and just broader marks. And then I can like lift it. And then sometimes when I do that, I automatically switch to doing the grasses. So like immediately just turn it vertical. And now I am pointing it at the paper and touching in those fine grasses.
Love it.
Because the edge of the pathway, a lot of times you'll see a bit more shadow underneath whatever is there, like the grasses or ferns or something, as they lean over the pathway. And you'll also get some highlights on them. The grasses can like catch the light, so maybe here and there I'll use some like really vibrant yellow or something and just catch some of the tips of those. They'll stand out more if you have a darker background than if you're just painting on like a neutral green.
Okay, so we're at the half-hour mark here, just so that everyone knows.
Oh, okay. That goes so fast.
I know, yeah. You're just speaking on. Don't worry, Sarah.
Gotta be bold.
Yeah, bold, and it's really fascinating watching Sarah like put this together here. I posted a link to her mini workshop in the chat. So she is doing a more in-depth, what she's talked about today. She'll go further in depth in the mini workshop. The link is there in the chat. And just another note too with Etchr, we do now offer workshops to companies or schools. So if anyone is interested, just email us at studio@etchrlab.com. And if you really like our products and you would like to see them more in your local stores, tell your local stores about us and we'd be happy to provide them in stock. Whitelist our email studio@etchrlab.com to ensure that you receive the info about the workshops, reminders for the live demos and more. And then, yes, if you are really into what Sarah has been showing so far, please sign up for the mini workshop. We'd be really happy to see you there and to paint along beside her as well. Okay.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah.
Hope to see some of you guys there.
Absolutely. All right. Now here you go with those bold strokes.
Yeah, I love doing a silhouetted tree in front of a bright background. It makes everything just pop even more.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll usually start with like a deeper tone like this, and then I'll add a bit of like a lighter dusty color on the tree trunk on the backside. Although it's better to wait for it to dry a little bit. It gets a little easier to blend the color in.
Yeah.
And I try to be like really loose with my tree branches, because if I sit and think about every single tree branch, I make them look so stiff.
Yeah.
So either using a flat brush or a round brush, I'll make quicker marks.
Yeah.
And it helps I try to be as random as I can when I do it. So I'm not making like predictable,
right,
repetitive motions.
Yeah.
Because then I'll end up making the same like place, they'll all like line up or be the same distance apart, and it just isn't believable. It's not as believable. And
do you ever tone or underpaint with a burnt sienna?
Well, I don't just do it with burnt sienna. I do it with all sorts of colors. Like actually this one that I showed earlier, I do bright colors typically for like a lot of this one was a bright orangish yellow.
Wow.
And that popped through a lot in the final painting.
Yeah.
And then I just painted my wall. Some of this one that I showed earlier as well. That was an orange undertone, like bright orange. And I think I shifted it from the orange to the blue, but a lot of that orange showed through in the end. And then that was another example of the super bright yellow. So yeah, using the really vibrant tones is my favorite. Right. Magenta.
So anything, any color you can use to tone as
long definitely. Yeah. There are no rules.
Yeah.
It totally depends on what you are trying to say with your painting.
Right. Love it. We got some people already registered for your mini workshop, so thank you.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one will give me a little more of an opportunity to explain things, I think.
We'll have a little bit more time for you.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more.
So one thing I like to do is get a really dry brush. So I let my brush just kind of dry out on its own. And then I load it up with like that dusty lavender color, and I'll dust it on the back of the tree trunk. And it's such a subtle thing, but I feel like it gives it more depth. And I like to use those vertical brush strokes to kind of indicate the tree bark as well. And then here and there, you might get a little bit of a side to side mark to break it up a little. If I could, I mean, I could go even more intense with that color, and oops, yeah, I just put green on it. But subtle is good too. I think it's fun to have a painting that jumps between the really subtle colors, maybe more grayish colors, and your bright pops of color. They kind of like help each other sing in the painting. One thing we could also do if we really want to like put, have some bold choices, we can add a bit of rim light to this tree by using some of that salmon color. So the light is just like hitting the very edge of it. It's very subtle. It could even dance on the side of this tree trunk a little bit, or some of the tree branches. So you can kind of add a pop of that color here and there. But you can also go overboard with those final touches. And I know it's like super subtle here. It's probably even hard to see. Just a little bit in the branches, a little bit on the edge of that tree. And my final tidbits would be just little highlights here and there, maybe on the grasses with some vertical marks. So same brush, just like turning it sideways. And because that green I put down is pretty dark, these brighter grasses will show up better.
Yeah.
And then as I go down towards the foreground where it's really shadowy, I'll shift to like a, I'll add white to my bluish green color and use a more muted green. So, oops, throw the brush. If the grasses are still in shadow, these grasses are still in shadow, so they won't really catch that like super brilliant bright light. They won't be backlit. So adding a bit of white desaturates it, and they still feel a little bit brighter against this green, but they won't be as like in your face, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes it's fun, like when the bristles separate like this, you can get more like dotted marks. So you'll be doing some grasses, and then all of a sudden you'll get these like little spots happening. But to me, that just adds to the variety. And I don't want the whole thing to be the same type of mark, no matter what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, like just letting the brush do its thing. Sometimes I'll even spread the bristles out like that and just sweep it up, and I'll get individual like little chunks coming off.
Awesome.
So yeah, get creative with your brushes.
Absolutely. We got comments here on your use of brush. Like you really know how to get nice texture, and you're really confident in this kind of technique. So people are really admiring that.
Oh, thanks everyone.
And have you ever used acrylic gouache? And
I have barely used acrylic gouache. I'm interested in it. I'm actually more interested in open acrylics.
Open acrylics?
Open acrylics, they're acrylics, but they stay wet for longer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it just kind of fascinates me because I started with acrylic way back in the day.
Right.
But with gouache, I like use gouache for a specific reason, and that's because it dries fast and it has a matte texture, which allows this beautiful dry brush. And so acrylic gouache, and the fact that you can reactivate it. So I can always go back in and blend things in this painting.
Yeah.
And so acrylic gouache kind of takes away from that part. And so I guess it doesn't really interest me as much. But
acrylic gouache, like it's kind of permanent, right? It has that.
Yeah. Once it dries, it's dry. You can't let it dry on your palette. You have to be aware of how the layers are going to be permanent once they're down. So it does change how you approach it.
Right.
But I think it can be useful for setting like the background tone maybe and letting that dry. So that's permanent. You don't have to worry about like picking it up. Or maybe I'm just too set in my ways. Like I like my gouache how it is. Don't mess with my gouache.
Right. Like if it ain't broke, you know, don't be trying to fix it.
Yeah, it's perfect for what I like to do.
Okay. Um, what size brush is this one that you're using here?
This is the 1/2 inch.
1/2 inch.
Yeah, it's a good size. I typically like to, that's one thing I should have mentioned is I like to use the biggest brush I can for as much of the painting as I can. That's
Right.
why I was using this 1-inch brush for the majority, because it forces you to think about the whole painting rather than immediately get bogged down in all the little details. It's, especially if we're working quick like we are today, or well, like I am today, it's a great way to just keep it moving. Like I can try to make really detailed marks with these big brushes, but it'll be very difficult.
Cool. We got another in for your workshop, and
Yay.
yeah, Sarah will have more opportunity to slow down and explain a couple of things a little bit more in detail. So
Yes. And I'm very used to that because I do paint-alongs. I have been doing them for years. And so it's usually 2 hours of painting, like from start to finish.
yeah.
I'll talk through everything. And so people aren't lost. I try to approach it from like, if I was just starting, what do I need to hear to make this painting happen?
That's excellent. That's a mark of a good teacher right there. Awesome. So yeah, I'll post the link to the workshop here one more time. And we are 40 minutes in, so we have 20 minutes for Sarah to talk more about the process. Any other questions for her? If we have a little bit of time at the end of the hour, then we'll do like a bit of a Q&A if we need to.
And yeah, I did kind of rush through a lot of this, so I feel like I didn't get to explain a lot, but if you have any specific questions about this painting, let me know. Yeah. Otherwise, I'll just kind of think about, as I continue, I'll mention anything else I think of.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm just kind of touching little colors into fuse. A lot of times I'm experimenting. Like, yeah. At this point, I could say my study is done, but since we have time, I'll keep going. And so I'll test little things out. I'll like try a color here, a color there, and like file that information away for my next painting. So obviously this is also a good thing. Like looking through your own sketchbook is really good reference. So remembering how, or not, you don't have to remember, you can just look at it and see, oh, I tried this color with this color and it definitely didn't work. Awesome. So yeah, right now it's a little bit more experimental.
Okay. Okay, well, since we're kind of like at the tail end of your painting here, why don't you talk about the color charts? Because that was something that was really interesting at the beginning. And they
so these are so easy to make. You take a bunch of watercolor paper, cut it up into strips, or paint it while it's all together if you want. But basically all the colors in your palette, you will try them together. So blue and yellow. I have multiple blues and multiple yellows, which is why I have so many of these. But then you just start with one color and you slowly add the other color until you get to the other pure color. And that is so much more useful than just those squares that you see, a lot of like the grids of color, which are also good for some reasons, but this is good and it's portable. So I actually take these outside with me a lot when I paint outside. So and awesome. It gives you a huge variety of colors. So just by doing, like this 3 colors, I can get so much out of this, and I never really would have known unless I did this. Right. Or it would have taken me a lot longer to figure it out, at least.
Right. And you label them with the paint colors, I'm assuming?
Sorry, what?
They're labeled?
Oh yeah. Well, I've memorized my colors, but it is really good to label, especially if you have like 2 colors that are kind of similar looking. So I kind of keep like all my burnt siennas or burnt umbers together, and then my reds. So it's also a great way to compare like how different things can be. So if I mix permanent alizarin crimson with cobalt versus primary blue, I get very different mixes. Like the cobalt colors lean a lot more towards the grayish side of things, which is beautiful. I love that. And the primary blue is like super intense, so you'll get much more vivid purples. But yeah, you can compare them side by side. So if you're painting a commission and you're like doing a coastal scene or something, you can quickly reference these and you'll know exactly what colors to go for because you have like all this information in front of you. So it's a time saver, but it's such a valuable learning tool as well.
Wow, I need to start doing those color strips the way it's.
And you can do it with any medium. I've done it with oil. I've done it with watercolor. It's just so helpful.
Right.
And then I just cut them up and yeah.
They're kind of like those paint chip samples that you get from the
Yeah, like that, except two colors.
Right.
and showing all the mixes you can get with them.
Yeah.
And since people may have been, I mentioned this earlier, I think that I sometimes paint for my palette box. Mm-hmm. So this is how I typically paint, especially if I'm going to be painting for a while or have more colors. I have all my colors in here except white. I always use fresh white. And this comes with a little silicone cover. And then I added a piece of, I added my own swatch sheet basically. And then this covers that. And it has like a super tight seal when it's closed. And I can just toss it in my backpack. And I paint way more often with this setup because it's ready. I don't have to like get my palette tray and think about the colors and like put them on the palette and refill my colors all the time. Like everything is right here. I can just grab it from the palette and go mix it on my tray. So it's kind of, I think a lot of people see those jelly gouache sets nowadays. Yeah. And it's kind of like that idea, except it's customizable and it's my professional grade paint. And I can, it's very portable. It even has a little clip down here so you can hold it in your hand when you're outside really easily. So it's extremely convenient. Highly recommend. What else? Trying to think of like all my gouache tips all of a sudden.
Right. I'm looking at the chat here.
Let's do some peeling.
What is the box, that magical box that you showed?
That magical box. It's the brand is very random. It's called Splendy. So I actually tried to find it because a lot of people ask about it and I can't find it online anymore.
No.
But if you just search for sealable watercolor box or palette box on Amazon or wherever you like to shop, it should come up with something very similar. Just make sure you get one with a silicone seal because otherwise your paints might like flow into each other, which is bad.
Okay.
So yeah, there are quite a few online I've seen. All sorts of random brands. Show you a quick close-up of the craziness.
Oh, looks so good. Yay.
It's hard to like get the angle to show you the texture.
Oh, the textures look so good.
And that's, I don't know, how was it, half an hour? That's a really fast demo for me.
Really power through. So,
but I did paint it earlier, just as I mentioned, and so this is the same idea, just with an hour involved. Like if I spend an hour on something, I get a little bit better.
Yeah.
Or at least I can focus a little bit more on things.
Right.
But I hope that you guys enjoyed it either way.
Absolutely do. Yeah.
I love gouache so much. It's become my new favorite medium. I can geek out about it all day long.
Right, yeah. Let me see what questions we have here.
Yeah, they're really affordable. If you just search for the generic terms, you'll find a ton of different brands. I wouldn't spend more than like 15 pounds. Otherwise you're getting ripped off. Yeah. At least from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So mine was, I think, 10 to 15 pounds when I bought it back in the day. Yeah. So I love it. It's been amazing I've had it for over a year now, I think. Mm-hmm. And I've never experienced mold with it or anything. Like maybe it depends on the gouache you use or how wet you keep it and how often you open it. But yeah, just take care of it. Sometimes it's good to like check in on it once in a while. Give it a little spritz, give it a little mix. But I paint with it so often that it's not a problem for me.
Right. Do you have any tips on painting gouache plein air? So we have quite a few questions about the taking it outside for plein air.
Oh, yeah, that's the majority of what I do with my studies, because I find painting from life so much better.
Yeah.
In terms of like learning experience, I learn so much more.
Yeah.
And that is the box that I use outside. I will just set it next to me, or I'll bring a big, I have all sorts of different setups. I'll bring a pochade box sometimes and have everything on my pochade box, or I'll balance everything on my lap and then it falls over and it's a mess.
Mhm.
Um, it's just one of the struggles of painting outside that you get used to.
Yeah.
And oh, the most important thing though, whether you're outside or inside, but especially outside, is having a spray bottle because it dries out faster with the wind. I find just outside it dries fast. And
Yeah.
I'm always like every 10 minutes or more, I'm spritzing my palette, both the piles of color or the palette box and the mixes.
Right.
So this is your best friend.
Can you show that in the other camera here? The
Sorry.
water. Yep, there you go.
Just a little spray bottle. Like you can find these almost anywhere.
Right.
I have a ton of them.
Right.
They are very important because if you try to just get your brush or your paint wet with your brush, usually it's too much water and you end up with a big pile of diluted gouache that
Mhm.
is not good.
Yeah. And do you still use water? This question's a little confusing, so correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but are you using water brushes when taking the gouache outside still?
Oh, yeah, I'm using the same brushes. I have like 1,000 brushes that I've collected over the years, and I keep a sorry, I'm going to show you really quick. I keep a roll of brushes in my bag at all times. So
Yes. You got the term?
it's called a go bag. It's a go bag, painting go bag. So this is what I take with me: flat brushes, skinny brushes, round brushes. It's ready to go. I keep a specific plein air sketchbook in my bag. I keep a little padded seat thing. I keep a jar of, well, it's not full of water now, but when I go out, it is. So everything's in there. It makes it so much easier. And you just got to make things easier for yourself if you want to paint often, especially if you're going outside.
Mhm.
Having everything ready so that you don't have to second guess yourself and chicken out.
Yeah.
Because that's a thing.
Okay, that's what we got here. A lot of thank yous, a lot of I love the colors. Thank you for the demo and useful tips. There was something about how to choose colors that I saw earlier. I'm sorry, Mary, if I missed your question. So, but we got time now, so maybe we can have Sarah elaborate here. I guess it comes down to Sarah. How do you decide which colors to go with? Like you did mention that colors explain the mood a lot. So,
Yeah.
how would
And I
you
think
use?
that's very personal. Like when I look at these colors, I'm happy. So if I'm happy painting it, more likely than not, I'll paint something that feels happy. If I'm painting, going for like a spooky vibe or just a really earthy vibe, which is, I love doing that as well. I'll choose colors that are inherently earthy. Like they lean a little bit more towards the gray side of things, the brown side of things. They aren't super vivid in your face colors. And that will just help me achieve my goal of painting something just more subdued.
Mhm.
And I mean, because everyone has a different personal experience of color. Like, not everyone finds yellow and orange to be happy. Not everyone finds red to be angry. So I
Right.
guess it is personal in that sense. But going back to what I said about my reference photos, I turn my reference photos black and white, and like I choose a selection of colors. So I always go with a limited palette, and I decide what's going to be my darkest dark and my brightest bright. And then I'll just use that rule throughout the painting. So while I'm painting this, I knew my shadowy tones would be more along these lines, and my brighter, happier tones would be along these lines. And yeah, it's just much easier that way, I think. So I know I can just rely on that idea to paint my scene.
Right.
But the whole concept of color and mood is a little more abstract and impersonal.
So much of it
So
is like just trusting your intuition and listening to
yeah, and experimenting too, like your past experiences with painting, you'll kind of know what works and what doesn't the more you do it.
Right.
What color combinations work, what they make you feel and stuff like that. So
we did have one question about the palette box again. Would you take this palette box, magic box, on a plane?
Yeah, I have actually. I brought it with me way back in the day when we could fly.
Yeah.
Yep, I have. It's great. This did fine. My ink brush, on the other hand, exploded. So this one was okay. I guess it's not like 100% airtight because it like was able to release its own pressure or something, but it didn't have any leaks. It was totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess it would also depend on your brand that you buy. You may have, like what I said before, is I added a piece of watercolor paper between the silicone seal and the lid, which makes it just a little bit tighter. When these clamp down, it's just a tiny bit tighter. Without that, I was like a little nervous it would leak, or like if I tilted it, the colors would spill into each other.
Right.
But with this, it doesn't. So
it's because of the silicone.
Yeah, the silicone like suctions to the tops of all the boxes inside, and then the paper pushes that down, and then the lid pushes all of it down together.
Yeah. So that's the trick. So I know there are people are trying to find this particular palette.
Oh yeah. So like I said, I don't think this particular brand even exists anymore. You can see the name of it there, Splendy. And if you Google that, or at least I couldn't find it here in Scotland, but if it's called Watercolor Box. And so if you search for that or palette box, you will probably find something similar.
Right. Okay, cool. So we have a few minutes left. Go ahead and type in some more questions if you have any. I will just kind of wrap up here a little bit just so that I can get that out of the way. But if I see any questions, we'll answer them here real quick at the end. So if you followed along with Sarah today, or if you plan to follow along with her after the demo is over, please tag us on Facebook and Instagram when posting the art you made during these demos and mini workshops, or even pictures of you taken during the session while you're watching it. Hashtag Etchr mini workshop, and you will be in the monthly draw for US $50. An art voucher to be used at our store. That is always fun to do. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to Sarah as well. I believe, Sarah, you're on all the platforms, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I have the same name pretty much everywhere.
Okay, so Sarah, yeah, at all the things. And now while that we have a little bit of time here, if you guys could fill out our feedback form for the demo, we'd really appreciate that. And then again, Sarah Burns Studio is Sarah's handle on all things internet. And then let's see, I posted the mini workshop link in the chat again one more time. We've already got.
We're actually going to be doing snow for that workshop.
Why don't you talk about that with us, Sarah? Like, why snow?
Why snow? Why would you do that to us? I went on, so I'm actually 76 days into a 100-day gouache challenge. And I did a whole week or two or maybe more of snow. And during that time, I learned more about color in the landscape than before, than by doing all sorts of random subjects. And I think the reason is because snow reflects light. So depending on what color the sky is, what things are around the snow, if there's water, all of that is going to make a difference in the final look and the final result. So it was like the biggest challenge. And because of that, I was like, this is such a good learning subject. And I think I've done a few videos on my own channel for it, but I love using it as a learning tool. And so that's why I like to torture people.
Yeah, apparently. But just looking at this in your toned sketchbook, no less, is absolutely gorgeous.
So the toned sketchbook is amazing for snow. I highly recommend. I am going to get a gray sketchbook soon and try it out. And I think that'll be really cool as well, because I think the color, if I use colors on the snow, it'll be even more intense. So yeah, that's the plan for the workshop.
Yeah, that's You guys.
Oh, and then we go into tropical. The opposite. I was like so done with snow. I'm like, we're going somewhere tropical.
Awesome.
But it's a fascinating subject, definitely challenging, but they're like along the way, I figured out little tips and tricks that make it a little more approachable, at least I think. And some step-by-step things you can do in every snow painting.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So will the mini workshop require a tone sketchbook, or are you going to be showing it on a regular white paper sketchbook?
Good question. Well, I guess I could use a white one because most people will use a white sketchbook. Maybe I'll do a couple examples on the gray just to show like all the differences you can get with that. I think that would be good. But yeah, it is probably better, more universal if I use white paper.
Yeah.
Most people are starting with that. But I will already say that I do tone the whole page when I start my snow paintings. So we'll be doing that. But I'm really excited for that.
Same. All right, I'm gonna post the mini workshop link here one more time. Paint some
tropical workshop. Oh, tropical.
Oh my gosh, right? People are just dying to go and like go on vacation these days now.
I know. We all are, right?
All right. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you so much for spending an hour with me and Sarah today. This was a lovely, lovely time. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Sarah, thank you so much again for sharing us your wisdom and your color philosophy here today. We're really looking forward to our mini workshop. So please go ahead and take a look and see what Sarah has to offer there. And again, for everyone else, if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel or followed us on Instagram or what have you, please do so. And then we'll see you all next time. Okay, good luck in finding this palette box, everyone. I know it's still the conversation here, so good luck. We'll see you all at the next demo, at the next workshop, all right?
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody.
See you next time.